Hi, Misha here, and I have another 1/72 scale diecast model to talk about the history and do my best review on. And this one is of a pretty unique late war German design. I've done a couple of videos on the Messerschmitt Me-262, the first jet. You know it. I've even done some on more obscure planes like the Hinkel HE-162 and the Messerschmitt Rocket 163. But Germany wasn't just resting on jets and rockets at the end. They were still developing piston aircraft. Now, one kind of famous one is the TA-152, based on the FW-190, the Focke-Wulf. And I will do a video on it. But tonight I felt like talking about this interesting critter, the Dornier Do.335. This is a multi-role aircraft, with its most unique innovative feature being its so-called push-pull engine setup arrangement. It is a two-engine design, but whereas most two-engine aircraft have one on each wing, this guy has one in the rear and then one in the front in the more traditional location. And these are two separate engines, and there were several reasons they did this. And this model is from Solido Warmaster, and it's based on the IXO tooling. So what do we have here, and how did it do? Well, Dornier took kind of inspiration from flying boats and other large aircraft from World War I and 1920s for this push-pull arrangement. In 1939, they were working on a new, fast, high-speed, light bomber. But the RLM kind of stepped in and ordered this project canceled. Instead, they issued specifications for something new. They wanted a different type of single-seat, light, fast bomber. And kind of using their earlier work and studies, Dornier replied in 1942 with what they called the P-231. And it had some pretty stiff competition. Pretty much every maker who was anyone put in a design like Hinkel and Arado and others. But the Dornier design was the most advanced and had the most potentiality. So it was selected in the summer of 1942. And the airframe approval was designated 8-335. That was just the number. And hence it became the DO-335 as it entered into production. However, in late 1942, the RLM came back to Dornier. They didn't cancel the contract outright, but they said, we don't need a fast, light bomber anymore. I mean, obviously by 1942, the war is starting to go in a very different direction for Germany. Instead, they said, we need a multi-role heavy fighter, something they could configure as they needed. Dornier complied, and so they had to scramble to rework the design. And they'd already started building the first prototype, so they had to rework it. Thus, the first prototype did not take to the skies until October 26 of 1943. And while it showed great potential, they encountered multiple problems, a lot to do with the landing gear for some reason. So it flew over 24 times, And then on the last day of the year, December 31st, it was joined by 335 V2, the second prototype, which had a lot of fixes and changed the engine up. And then on January 20th of 1944, the third prototype flew with yet more changes, and it had the production engines they wanted to use in the aircraft installed. So yeah, they had some prototypes. The RLM was testing them, and it did well. In fact, so well that on May 23rd, Führer, Hitler, ordered this be given the highest possible production priority. And on July 3rd, it became part of what was known as the Emergency Fighter Program. An initial order of 120 was soon updated to 2,000 examples, split between two different factories. But, just as the first pre-production airplanes were getting ready to go, the original production line, which had just been set up, was destroyed in March of 1944, so they had to scramble to build the new production line, thus causing more delays. On top of that, the engines they wanted to use were being used by other German aircraft, which caused delays, and even though the government ordered those other aircraft to take a lower priority to the 335, it just didn't work out that way. Blada. Long story short, the first early production aircraft weren't made available to the Luftwaffe until January of 1945. So what do we have, and why was it such a high priority? Well, the push-pull arrangement has several advantages. Speed being utmost, also maneuverability, less drag. If one engine went out, it would not give asymmetric power. Having the engines both on the center line of the aircraft gave it a little bit better balance and weight and all that good stuff. And I think at some point it just to look weird and cool. No, it really was not it was a good notion, truly. And it all proved true. This was the fastest piston aircraft in all of Nazi Germany. It could get up to 426 miles per hour under standard cruise, or if they pulled out all the stops and used the boost, it could get up almost to 475 miles per hour. For a piston aircraft, that's pretty impressive. It could even get up to 350 miles per hour with one engine not working. It also had a very good time to climb rate, and it was quite well armed. As I said, they wanted it to be a multi-role aircraft so they could make it in several different configurations. It was to be used some versions as quote-unquote heavy fighters, other versions known as intruders. Also, there would still be a light bomber version, a night fighter version, even a reconnaissance version was planned. To that end, it was standard armament included one 30mm cannon with 7D rounds. It's late, guys. So, sorry. One 30mm cannon with 70 rounds. And two 20mm cannon with 200 rounds each. So nearly 500 rounds of cannon shells. On top of that, it had an internal bomb bay capable of carrying 1,000 kilograms, so 2,200 pounds. And if that's not enough, it also had two external hard points, one under each wing. And these were multi-purpose. They could either carry fuel tanks, they could carry bombs, they could even carry gun pods if it was more in the ground attack or fighter bomber role. And it's not a small plane. It's almost as, well, it's basically the same width and length. It's 45 feet with just a little bit of change. It always amuses me when a plane is basically as wide as it is long. As a standard model, it had just the pilot, single seat, but a two-seat version was built in small numbers, and it was known as the Fail, German for arrow, and it was often named the Steel Arrow or the Iron Arrow. And it gave Allied piston aircraft a run for their money. Again, it wasn't just that it was fast, it was also quite maneuverable, and with two engines arranged the way they were, it was a little hard to knock out of the sky. Thankfully for the Allies, by the time this was really flying, the war was over. In fact, there's only one or two reports from April of 1945 of Allied pilots spotting these flying around, and I couldn't read any, although I didn't really investigate, but I couldn't find any just dogfights or kills attributed. They didn't make many because of all the delays. There was only 16 prototype and early pre-productions, and somewhere between 20 and 22 late pre-production and full productions made. So the estimated numbers seem to be 36 to 38 Dornier 335s. After the war, these were studied quite intensively and with interest by the Allies. The British studied them, and America took two over the ocean for testing under what was known as Project Lusty. And it's actually one of these two that America borrowed that still survives in the world today. There's only one surviving example in 2020. And it barely didn't. It barely survived. It almost wasted away in the weather. Even though jets for the future, just goes to show you that they were still not giving up on piston, and came up with a very interesting aircraft capable of fulfilling quite a few jobs. As for the model itself, it has spinning propellers, gear up or down. It is primarily die-cast. It's quite a heavy chunk. It has a rudimentary cockpit, no pilot. I think it's neat how the rear, how the tail is, how it has the bottom stabilizer. That's to protect the propeller from strikes on the ground when taking off or landing. You can also see the intake and exhaust and everything for it. It's a very interesting configuration. Yeah, not really any combat history to speak of, but from an engineering standpoint, just very creative, and late war Germany turned out some very interesting designs. So I thought I would share this one with you tonight. What do you think of it? I appreciate you tuning in. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.